get my 6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the most awesomeness YouTube channel about homesteading on the internet, homesteading off the grid, which has nothing to do with homesteading. I think I said that wrong. I don't know. It's like, welcome back to another story for October Nights. Once again, just like last time, we're going to read from October Nights Part 2. Really creepy story here, and it shows that there are just weird things going on all over the world. We're back in the woods here this evening, so make sure to get my 6. Watch for him, her, it, or they. You never know who or what may or may not show up in the backdrop of these videos. Yeah, this story takes us to the Philippines, where I spent 6 years. It's where I met my beautiful bride, Dearly, a.k.a. Giggly Girls, where we had our darling son, Daniel. Let's get to it. This one's creepy. It's called The Roots of Justice, okay? Author's note. I recently, while at my home in Virginia, received an email from an old friend in the Philippines, which simply read, "I thought you'd like to know I heard from T, our treasure hunting friend from Ukraine. Everything we were told about the tree is true." I replied simply, "How do you know?" To which my correspondent responded, "He was forced to trek the tunnels, and he came out the other side completely unharmed. The man forced to take the trek with him did not." I didn't sleep a wink for the next 3 nights, just thinking of the significance of this message. The tale of my friend T and the tree in question is as follows. The month was October, but there were no autumn leaves in sight because I was not in the deciduous forests of the eastern U.S. at the time. Rather, I was in the tropical islands of the Philippines. I longed for home more strongly that time of year than ever, as fall, particularly the month of October, was my favorite time of year back home. Oh, how I miss the red and gold leaves of autumn, and pumpkins and jack-o'-lanterns everywhere, corn stalks and scarecrows and costumes, oh my. But no, I was having nothing but surf and sand, and as envious as you might be about that while reading this, I would have traded you positions in the month of October in a heartbeat. I would have also, however, traded you back come winter. Let's see. Winter in Virginia, or winter in the tropical islands of the Philippines. Winter in Virginia, where it's sub-freezing most of the time and dreary and gray, or winter in the white sandy beaches, crystal blue waters of the tropical Philippines, where it's never below 82 degrees. Decisions. On with the story. I had traveled from the remote seaside village where I was living at the time to the closest large city in order to renew my visa. The name of said city is being withheld so as not to endanger friends and family still in the area, as the area is heavily populated with kidnapping savages who would take those my family and I know hostage for ransom should they ever find out we have a slight degree of means here in the U.S. While in the city for just a few days, the trip was too long to do in one night, I called upon an old friend, Ray, who had been my best friend when I lived in the city for a while before moving to the jungle. Per usual, Ray and I went out and walked some of our old haunts and had several cold ones at some of our old favorite watering holes and capped off the night at Marco's, a local bar and grill of sorts, owned by an English friend of ours and frequented by many other expats from various countries from around the West. On that particular evening, we met a man we'll call T, since his name does begin with the letter T, and because it is my hope to keep his confidence. T was from Ukraine. He'd been in the Philippines for more than 6 years, hunting various treasures, gold left over from the days of Spanish colonization and hidden from the Japanese during the Second World War, but never recovered afterward. And he happened to be in the city for the same reason I was. While he'd been at the immigration offices earlier in the day, another foreigner, as non-Filipino nationals are referred to in the country by the locals, had informed him of Marco's, so he decided to stop by and have a few conversations in English before heading back into the deep, dark jungles in search of treasure. It was common for expats to share our experiences with each other while gathered, drinking far too many bottles of San Miguel Light and telling far too many lies, mostly centered around how important we all were back in our homelands. We were all aware, however, of the unspoken truth in this regard. If we had been that damn important back home, we would have still been there. T talked not of his self-importance back in his former Soviet bloc, though he did exhibit pride and enthusiasm that his fellow countryman, Vladimir Klitschko, was the world's heavyweight boxing champion at the time. Instead, T told us of his many treasure hunting adventures and of many of the strange and odd things he'd encountered during his treks. One story in particular jumped out at me. It was a story about a tree, and not just any tree, but a tree that was said to be more than 1,000 years old and extremely haunted. The Spanish used to hang thieves and the like from it during their occupation, T said. The locals, being superstitious as they are, of course, believed this had brought many angry spirits, negative energies, and even legions of demons to the tree. And when the Americans liberated the islands from the Spanish during the Spanish-American War, the Filipinos thought that if they hanged enough Spaniards from the tree, they might please the spirits of their ancestors, and they would release the angry spirits, negative energies, and all the demons from the tree. But alas, all they did was make things worse by adding more deaths to the tree's toll. The tree at the center of the matter was a giant balete tree, which was in the remote jungle province about 6 hours south of where we were at the time, at least as far as road travel by bus or motorcycle went. I knew that it is true that balete trees can live for more than 1,000 years. There was one in Manila, the capital city, which was said to be nearly 1,400 years old. Balete trees, which are in the ficus family, begin life by sprouting on the limbs and branches and even the trunks of other trees. They begin life with air-fed roots, so at first their relationship with their host tree is symbiotic, much like the Spanish wanted the Filipino people to believe their relationship would be when they first occupied the islands. However, in time, the balete tree's roots make contact with the ground, and at that time they burrow into the soil, and the tree grows to enormous size. Some of them are over 200 feet tall, and I have seen pictures of these trees with more than 30 and sometimes 40 men encircled around their base. Needless to say, they would come to dominate the very plants that had allowed them to survive during their infancy, just as Spain would come to dominate the Philippines once they'd colonized in sufficient numbers. The symbiotic relationship the balete trees have with their host ends once their roots go subterraneous. At this point, the balete tree overtakes its host, robbing it of all sunlight and water, eventually killing it. Then, its ginormous root system sprawls out and takes over other neighboring trees and does the same to them. In time and over centuries, this root system forms tunnels or caves, and anyone who's spent any amount of time in the remote areas of the Philippines where these trees are found has doubtlessly heard story upon story of superstition and fright associated with these tunnel systems. Most Westerners, however, write these tales off to just that, superstition and fright. We've all heard those stories, I told T as he finished his tale, about those big trees. Let me guess, a capre came down and kidnapped a beautiful young Filipina maiden and she was never seen again. If y'all haven't read Isle of Capri by this guy, you got to. It's on Amazon, print and Kindle. Not in this tale, T said. Let's hear the man out, Kevin, Ray said, the always much more patient Englishman that he was, especially in comparison to me, his much younger and much more impatient American drinking buddy. The story I've heard is that they actually use the root system of the trees as their judicial system, rather than holding a traditional court, T said. The accused is forced to trek through the tunnels. If he or she is innocent, they'll come out the other side, no problems. If they're guilty, the spirits of the deceased who hanged from the tree until death will swallow them whole, within the roots, and try as they might, any seekers will never find them. They simply walk into the tunnel, and they never come back out. Bullshit, I said. I don't believe it. Why don't you join me for an adventure, T said, challenging my opinion. According to where you said you're staying, the location of the tree isn't that far out of the way for you on your return trip. Typically, I'm one to jump at a challenge, but I'd learned by this point in the Philippines to trust no one, locals and foreigners alike, and at times foreigners less so than locals. Once the local culture is firmly learned, not trusting the locals comes easy. Basically, and this goes against all forms of political correctness back in the United States to state, but in the Philippines, if you're a foreigner, you are typically viewed as a walking, talking, living, breathing ATM machine, and just about anything will be said or done to get your money. However, once you come to the understanding of this hard fact, and it takes Americans longer to come around to accepting this fact than any other nationality, as a result of our culture's concept of political correctness, which exists in no other country to the degree that it does ours, The simple solution to avoid being taken advantage of is simply learning how to say the word no. One learns to say it forcefully and frequently, and as simple as it sounds, it's effective. In regard to trusting other foreigners, it's much more difficult, at least in not trusting them. There's an automatic rapport between foreigners in the Philippines simply due to the similarity in language and looks. However, many of them run off to the Philippines to meet up with that special girl they met online, which is usually a dude on a profile with his girlfriend's or sister's pictures, scamming electronically from afar. And once these foreigners run out of money and they realize they've been had, that's when whatever artificial relationship they've been involved with ends. They find themselves stuck with no way home. Many of them resort to begging and pleading for money from other foreigners they meet and befriend, or by scamming them, just like so many of the locals. By the end of the night, and perhaps because of too many aforementioned bottles of San Miguel Light, I'd agreed to join T on his adventure, and the date was set for us to leave in 2 days. The next day, when I asked my friend Ray, a man I'd always considered to be very wise, if he thought I was making the right decision to join T or not, he simply said, "Why not? My gut tells me he's safe, and maybe you'll end up with a story to tell." The following day, T and I traveled together by way of bus to the remote jungle village in question. I learned from T, while taking our long bus ride together, that his girlfriend, Dat, was actually from the small remote village where the tree that harbored the roots of justice, as I've come to call the tunnel system of the roots, is located. They'd been together more than a year, and she'd joined him on his journey to the bus interchange that led to the village, where she'd gotten off and taken another bus back to her native village to spend time with her family while T was in the city renewing his visa. T had told me on the ride that Dat was gorgeous. When she met us at the station, I saw that he was, as Ray had suspected, an honest man. Dat was in her late 20s. T was in his late 30s, about my age at the time. And she was gorgeous. She'd hired a van for our 2-hour-long trip from the bus terminal to her village. "What do you know about this tree?" I asked our driver, a local Filipino, after all the small talk crap that wastes so much of our time in life was out of the way. Fortunately, Filipinos don't waste nearly as much time with small talk as Westerners, especially Americans. Especially American middle-class yuppies. Jeez. "You're in luck," the driver said. "You will see for yourself tomorrow." "They're holding court that soon, are they?" T said. "Yes," the driver said. "A man is accused of killing a 5'6" lender." Okay, dear reader, or in this case, dear listener, let me explain what a 5'6" lender is. Basically, Indian nationals control the personal shark loan industry in the Philippines. They loan sums of money to small business owners, mostly people who have sari-sari stores, which are similar to small neighborhood convenience stores. These stores sell mostly cigarettes and alcohol and canned sardines and a few snacks. The owners are always hard up for money because they extend credit to most of their customers, and most of their customers never pay them back. Most of the 5'6" lenders never get paid back either. It's a very risky business for both. Problems arise when the Indian lender becomes too pushy with the Filipino borrower. Usually when this happens, the Filipino borrower will either stab the Indian lender to death with an ice pick. Most Filipinos carry one in their pocket at all times. If it's dark and there's no one around. If it's daylight or if there are people around, they'll wait until after dark, often going to the lender's home, if they can find out where it is, as the Indians know to be secretive in this regard, and shooting them. In the case of the man accused, the driver told us, the Indian lender was found dead in front of his sari-sari store, but the Filipino claimed his innocence. Further, he claimed he had never even borrowed money from the deceased. "We'll find out tomorrow," the driver said, and you could tell he was excited. His tone was similar to an American back home looking forward to an upcoming football game. But hey, I guess when you live in a jungle with no utilities, why not? Entertainment is entertainment. We enjoyed an afternoon and evening with Dat's family. She had half a dozen sisters as beautiful as she was, and as much as they all threw themselves at me, no doubt viewing me as an instant escape from third world poverty, boy, if they'd only known how truly broke I was at the time, I didn't even have to struggle to resist their advances. I had dearly waiting on me at home. We drank far too much tuba, coconut wine, late into the night, and everyone except T and me had stories of the tree and its roots of justice. Dat's father could remember going and watching the court's procession when he was a little boy. "Sometimes they come back, sometimes no," he said. The next day, thought I heard a tree knock. Keep getting my 6. The next day, I found that time passed slowly. Was I really in such anticipation for what was to happen? I guess I was. When the time came, we, myself, and all the villagers, lined the riverbanks on both sides. A loud cheer went up when the court procession was seen coming up the river. Basically, it consisted of the accused in front, paddling his own canoe, and he was followed by half a dozen other canoes. Each of those canoes had 2 men in them. One was rowing in the back, and the other in the front sat with an M16 machine gun trained on the accused to assure that if he were to try to flee, he would be killed. This is some serious shit, I said to T as the procession passed. Certainly different from where we come from, he said. The procession passed, and then we all waited again. 3 hours later, while I was actually leaning back against a coconut tree, half asleep, I was brought back to full consciousness by the sound of loud cheering. I stood and looked upstream, and here they came on their return, and the accused was leading the pack. The gunmen no longer had their weapons trained on the man. Apparently, he had walked through the tunnel system, and having come out the other side, was deemed to be innocent. Just as I suspected, I said, aloud and more to myself than anyone else, it was all bullshit. Then came the email from Ray and T's story, which I would come to gather by way of email correspondence. As it turns out, T married Dat a year or so after I'd left the Philippines to return to the U.S. We got some tree knocking going on. You hear it? Footsteps. Keep getting my 6. We're not alone in these woods. Dat and T, they decided to move back to her native village because they'd had a child and they needed help. Dat's mother cared for the child while T and Dat continued with their now only occasional search for treasure, and mostly while they spent their days running their Sorry store. Sadly, to date, T has never actually found any treasure. A local Filipino man in the village accused T of impregnating his wife. T, of course, sternly denied this claim. It was all considered a dramatic rumor until the man claimed that he came home one evening and found his wife dead. His wife had indeed been murdered, and he immediately accused T, claiming he'd killed her because he feared that when she gave birth, the baby came out half white, that the truth would be known, and upon the Filipino man's demands, T would be forced to face the tree which harbored the roots of justice. T once again claimed his innocence in light of the accusation that he was not just an adulterer, but now a murderer as well. The village council, with no idea of what other type of action to take, decided that T would walk the tunnels. As one could suspect, T refused, but the council of elders told him that he would walk the tunnels or he would be executed on the spot. T insisted that if he were to walk the tunnels, then the Filipino man who'd accused him of murder should walk them with him, because T felt the man was the murderer anyway. T was in possession of the knowledge that the man was actually sleeping with one of Dat's sisters, and he believed the man was simply trying to get his wife out of the way so that the two of them, the man and his mistress, could be together. The council decided both men would walk the tunnels. According to Ray's email, T told him that after he and his accuser had entered the tunnel, his accuser attacked him shortly after getting out of sight of the council. There was a gleam of sunlight coming through the roots, T had said in his email to Ray, which Ray forwarded to me. And it was then, when he could see me, that he sucker punched me from behind, T continued. I fell to the ground and he pounced upon me, but I used my size and strength advantage to get loose and on top of him. Just as I was about to beat his face off, he hit me in the forehead with a stone and I fell to the ground. T went on to say that he must have been knocked for a loop, because there is no way that what he saw next could have been real. I came to, he said, or at least I thought I'd come to, and I looked up and the man was standing over me, holding a huge rock with both hands. He was about to bring it down upon my head, a blow which would have no doubt killed me, when all of a sudden it was as if ropes were cast about him and wrapping his legs, arms, at first, then his torso. He dropped the stone and he screamed like no man I'd ever heard scream before or since. I shook my head, still seeing stars from the blow I'd received, but I'm convinced, as sure as I'm living and breathing, that it was, indeed, tree roots, not ropes, that had grabbed the man. And to be damned, I saw on the end of each root, all which reminded me of tentacles of some hideous ocean creature, a face. All these tiny faces screaming in agony and horror at the ends of those roots. They were filled with pain and rage, and they made the most horrific sounds as they held the man to the ground. I finally accepted that I was not seeing stars from the blow, T continued in his email to Ray, I was not in a daze. I was wide awake, fully conscious and fully aware. The only thing more frightening than this was seeing even more roots, evil tentacles with screaming faces, rushing out from the subterraneous root system of the giant tree. They completely covered the man. His screams could no longer be heard as they were muffled by the roots which now encased him, the roots of justice. And finally came the most horrendous sight of all, as these roots pulled the man into the ground, as if taking him into the belly of the tree for digestion. And once they had him underground, it all stopped. Nothing looked any different than it had before. I'd been sucker punched from behind. T claims it took him close to a full hour to get through the tunnels, and that he spent an equal amount of time looking back over his shoulder as he spent gazing forward, making sure the roots would not come up behind him and make him their next meal. He knew he had not killed the man's wife, but he had no idea what past crimes for which he'd not been caught and punished the tree's roots might finally make him pay. T was met, once reaching the village on his return trip, with loud cheers. As it turns out, the man who perished in the roots of justice that day was pretty much known as an asshole by everyone in the village, and he wasn't missed. T and his wife moved out of the village the next day. They had been living happily ever after elsewhere on a beach where there are no baleti trees around for miles and miles and miles. The end. So there you have it, folks. One heck of a creepy story from the other side of the world. Got me to thinking though, you know. November's only a couple days away. It's going to get cold. Winter in Virginia, or winter on the white sandy beaches of the Philippines. Oh, I shouldn't have read that story. Thinking about that now. I hope you enjoyed that story, and hope you come back tomorrow, All Hallows Eve, for our final installment of this year's October Nights. See you then for more.